everybody. I'm Christopher Green. You're watching AMTV Alternative Media Television Live. I'm with fearless AMTV reporter Chad Buxan, reporting from the Garden of the Gods in beautiful Colorado Springs, Colorado, probably one of the most beautiful places on Earth. And we must be in sync today, Chad, because I did a video earlier, Will Humanity Survive the Century?, where I give 6 reasons why, 6 challenges posed to humanity so we hopefully can make it to year 2100. Many of the smartest minds don't think that we're going to get there. And there was an article over the weekend that we went to that I tweeted, "How do we survive? Fearful Californians prepare for a nuclear attack." So I just want to preface this video for anybody that thinks this is fear-mongering. Top experts, like retired Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer and his group, believe it is far more dangerous today in America than it was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, than it was for many of you baby boomers, and think the risk of a nuclear attack is far greater today than it was 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Now, I've got Chad. Chad, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thank you. I hope you guys can hear me well. If it breaks up a little bit, I'm kind of high up in the mountain here to make sure I bring you guys good coverage. I hope you guys could see the mountain in front of me is where NORAD is located. I'm trying to get a good vantage point for you guys. I'm doing great. Now, this is the North American Aerospace Defense Command that you guys see in front of me, which is basically responsible for detection, validation, and warnings of any attack against North America, whether it's by aircraft, missiles, or space vehicles. Now, if you guys get a good view of the mountain here, there's actually a military bunker built inside this mountain. And I hope, Chris, that your audience can get a good view here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've got a good view, Chad. We're also going to run through some images. One of our producers here actually spent a few days at the NORAD facility, I think about 10 years ago. He was shooting for, I think, a documentary film or something like that. He says it's pretty amazing. There's a long tunnel where basically any kind of nuclear blast hits. The blast rushes through it to the other side of the mountain. And it's interesting that you brought up NORAD because you came to me with this story earlier. I was able to pull up a report. This is from the Huffington Post. The U.S. wouldn't defend Canada from missile attack under current policy, NORAD deputy commander says. This is the Huffington Post. Now, keep in mind, this is at a time where we're at grave risk of nuclear assault, right? What we're seeing with Kim Jong-un, and as you talked about in your last video, Chad, here we've got Rocket Man firing literal, real missiles over American ally Japan. 2 emergency alert systems have gone off just in recent weeks. The next one could be the real thing. God only knows. And what is Trump going to do here? I mean, again, North Korea, Kim Jong-un is firing real missiles. Trump is tweeting about it. I just can't help but think that we look very, very weak at this given time. And I think the real reason Donald Trump has failed to act thus far is because he knows exactly what's going to happen if he strikes Kim Jong-un. He's going to feel the full wrath and retaliation of not just North Korea, because it's really not about North Korea, but 1 billion Chinese, Mother Russia, and nuclear-armed Iran, because in a lot of respects, the North Korean crisis is just a proxy for a greater war.
Absolutely. And you know what? NORAD, what you see here, it was actually built because of the Soviet Union. It's kind of an alliance between us and Canada to protect North America from missile defense systems, from missiles coming into our airspace. Now, we know that North Korea and Russia and China are the main alliance, that they are that enemy alliance against America. So if we do attack North Korea, and that's why I think Donald Trump absolutely is holding off, knowing that Russia and China is going to get involved Now, again, NORAD was built during the time when we had risk with Soviet Union, and now we're even at a bigger risk, actually, now than we were back then. I think, Christopher, you've spoken about it, how we are in a bigger missile crisis now than we were during the Cuban Missile Crisis, during the Kennedy years.
Yeah, and it seems most people are oblivious to. I mean, what can Trump, even logically speaking, what can Trump do? It's why I fear a Pearl Harbor type event, because I think Donald Trump needs it in order to justify any kind of strike or attack on the North Korean people. Now, we've reported on this extensively. Pyongyang is completely desolate. Kim Jong-un has cleared out the entire city, which was interesting timing in and around what we saw with Hurricane Irma in your neck of the woods. Thankfully, you were prepared and taking a little time here to escape from what's going on down there. Many people still without power, many people homeless now. We saw this in Texas as well with the massive flooding. But I just really don't know what Donald Trump can do. Again, he needs some kind of event to justify an attack. And this is what I think the common man doesn't understand. It's not about North Korea. It's about China, Russia, and Iran. Your thoughts?
Yeah, he does. And look, people have spoken about this, that if we go to conventional warfare with North Korea, I mean, their missile capabilities will completely decimate South Korea, especially Seoul, the main city in South Korea. Millions of people are going to die, but he does need justification. It sounds to me like this administration doesn't want to kick the can down the road, but at the same time, he is surrounded by these globalist generals like H.R. McMaster, who are kind of speaking the same language as previous administrations. Now, how far are they going to go? They've already built a nuclear weapon. They're already testing hydrogen bombs. They're flying missiles over Japan. How far are we going to let them go? So Donald Trump definitely needs to make a decision, because if this goes to the next administration, God knows what's going to happen. Now, as far as the United Nations goes, look, the United Nations are not going to be with us, I don't think, at all. I think it's going to be up to Trump. I think it's going to be up to America. It's going to be up to the U.S. military to take out North Korea. I think if it is going to be into a bigger war, Donald Trump is going to have to make that decision. But I think that's why he's hesitating, because he knows, even behind the scenes, right now we had Rex Tillerson talking to the foreign minister in Russia after we had a huge diplomatic rough between each other regarding Syria, regarding Ukraine. Now we're having talks, and I think that those talks are starting to happen just because of North Korea. Now, these talks usually don't do anything. And again, if something does happen, right where you see here, in the image in front of me in NORAD, this is where presidents go. Now, reports have unconfirmed reports, because you're not going to see this in the news, shows that even George Bush, after 9/11, this is where he came to NORAD, in the military base inside of this mountain after 9/11.
Yeah, and by the way, they didn't scramble a single jet. Nothing was in the sky. Confirmation of the mainstream media images of that during September 11th. Not a single plane in the sky. NORAD essentially did nothing, or they just let it happen. I mean, that's kind of a side point, but it's not like Rocket Man Kim Jong-un is going to stop firing these missiles, right? He knows exactly what's going to happen to him. He'll end up like Muammar Gaddafi. He'll end up like Saddam Hussein. There is no way in the world he's going to give up his nuclear capability. Now, I remember when people called it fear-mongering a year ago when I talked about this, and, Kim Jong-un doesn't have the technology to fire a warhead and hit the West Coast. That's impossible. He couldn't strike with an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse. That's impossible. That's all fear-mongering. Now, the mainstream media and basically every pundit and every top expert agrees, yes, he can strike every American city. And as this one top expert, retired Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer, pointed out over the weekend, he thinks Long Beach is one of the potential targets of North Korea. And one of America's greatest vulnerabilities is an enemy state like North Korea or a terrorist organization somehow smuggling in a nuclear weapon into a cargo port, which would be very easy to do. I mean, this is what the top experts say, and they could just detonate remotely. I mean, this is what our government is analyzing right now.
I mean, very easy to do. That's the most dangerous thing. Our borders are completely unprotected. I mean, we have a huge illegal immigration problem, meaning any one of these people can come across the border with any kind of nuclear weapon or a dirty bomb from North Korea. Not even just that. Look, North Korea, they're going to keep putting sanctions. They're going to keep trying to tie them up financially. North Korea would have no problem selling one of their nuclear weapons to anybody who could do damage to the United States of America. I mean, God knows how many. They say about 60 nuclear weapons in their arsenal now. It could be more. The intelligence has been not so good because the time frame has actually advanced quicker than they even thought. North Korea, they're showing the evidence physically by firing missiles over our key ally. They are violating multiple UN resolutions, acts of war, violating them. And the only thing we're getting as far as feedback, unfortunately from Donald Trump is through these tweets. And again, the actual policy is kind of still the same with every other administration, how they talk tough. They talk tough, but they let Kim Jong-un get away with every missile test, nuclear test, and God knows where this is going. I mean, how far are they going to kick this can down the road? That's my question.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big difference between action and talk. And what are we getting? We're getting Kim Jong-un firing missiles, very real missiles. And the next one could be equipped with a nuclear warhead and could go off. He's firing missiles. Trump is tweeting about it. Trump said just a couple of weeks ago, North Korea will be met with fire and fury. He's assured Americans that North Korea won't have the technology to strike an American city under his watch. Something to that degree. Well, it kind of just seems to be baseless rhetoric, but I think, I understand Trump's position. He knows he's dealing with fire. I mean, this is what he's being advised right now. I mean, we're talking nuclear war, potentially, God forbid. I hope it doesn't happen. And we're talking about world war. Now, sanctions were just passed, intensified sanctions against North Korea, and now they're talking, which is probably likely to happen. Gas prices are, Trump tweeted about this as well, rising steadily as a result of these sanctions, crippling the North Korean economy. But they're also talking potentially about an oil embargo. Now, that is history repeating itself. We got the same thing. FDR placed Franklin Delano Roosevelt in an oil embargo against Japan before the strike at Pearl Harbor. And they knew without a shadow of a doubt that America would be hit as a result of those economic sanctions and economic warfare. And it's the same thing we're looking at today. Maybe history doesn't repeat exactly, but as Mark Twain says, it rhymes. And so we're seeing the same thing happen today, and it seems most Americans just think, again, it's fear-mongering, even though every top expert, government officials, the president himself, says he's about to unload fire and fury on this rogue nation. It's incredible to think that we live in these historical times, Chad.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. And my main fear is, given the fact how far North Korea has been let to go, and this is a main fear I have, just like Pearl Harbor, are they going to let thousands of Americans die just to go to war or have a justification to go to war with North Korea? Are they going to let thousands of Americans die just as they knew Japan was ready to go to war with us in World War II? Mm-hmm. The administration here, the U.S. military industrial complex knows North Korea, that's all they think about. That's how they control their people. That's how they continue their control over the country, knowing that war with America is inevitable. And how far is this going to go? Are they going to let thousands and thousands of Americans die just to justify a war with North Korea that's going to be inevitable anyway? And that's something people have to think about. Nobody wants war. Nobody wants to send their sons and daughters. But we have to look at history, and history repeats itself. And I absolutely feel, as you're saying, Chris, that history is repeating itself right now, just in the same manner as World War II.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And the war never ended. Again, there was never a peace treaty in Korea. So we are at war now. I mean, we are at war in this part of the world. And Stephen Bannon, on his exit, this is what he said, and I think he's right on. I mean, show me an option. Show me an alternative that Trump has to do what he needs to do in North Korea without the result being 1 million plus casualties, either in Seoul or Japan, God forbid the United States, or any American ally, or any country or people around the world, for that matter. Show me a solution where 1 million plus people aren't gone, right, in the blink of an eye. And it's just amazing. It makes you wonder who Trump is surrounding himself with now, what the real game plan is. I mentioned a top expert over the weekend said that he thinks Long Beach in California as a top target of North Korea. If he was putting it on a map, it'd be one of the top targets they'd potentially hit. I have via Twitter here, I posted this. Not to mention, he talks about an EMP, his words, electromagnetic pulse, that would likely knock out the electronic systems, including phones and computers, The pileups expected on the freeways as drivers are blinded by the flash of the explosion. The rush for food, water, and gasoline as millions of Angelenos attempt to drive out of the region. I mean, this is what the experts are telling us. We only have to look at Irma, which you reported on, and
Absolutely.
Harvey, which you also reported on, just to see what it looks like, what these evacuations look like, what the chaos on the ground actually looks at. I mean, I fear, God, the most dangerous place would be suburbs, right? Soccer
Chris.
moms running around in their vans with their kids trying to get food and water. I mean, Americans are not prepared for this at all. Also, South Korea is ill-prepared to fight back. There was a report that came out from CNBC a few days ago, said embarrassing failure of key ballistic missile by Seoul raises questions whether it can defend itself. Seoul can't defend itself. South Korea can't defend itself. It's got a THAAD system there. That's about it. So much is going on now, not just economically, but physical action, right? These are real missiles being fired, and they're extremely dangerous.
Now, Chris, when I was in Hurricane Irma, look, that was just a hurricane coming in. Supplies were gone. Food was gone. Water was gone. Thankfully I was prepared, and that was just a hurricane. Thankfully, I was prepared beforehand. Had a few items, had water, had food, had my bug out bag, things like that. But remember this, if people just wait for that disaster to strike, they're not going to have anything. There's not going to be anything coming in. If there is a missile attack and we end up going into World War III, probably a lot more people are going to die from starvation or being without supplies or without power due to an EMP attack. People have to be prepared for this situation. They have to look at history and understand the situation that we're dealing with now, because there is no way that the North Korean regime and America is just going to go back and forth with this diplomatic standstill for much longer, regardless of who's in power.
Yeah, Nikki Haley just said we're totally out of options. We have no options. They're going to send it over to the Pentagon. I mean, those are her words, and people need to watch what's going on with this economic warfare. Again, follow me on Twitter if you don't already, guys, at AMTV Media, but I tweeted September 16th, Beijing, China has announced plans to start a crude oil futures contract priced in yuan and convertible into gold. Okay? I mean, these are the steps America's enemies are taking. Venezuela just announced it will no longer accept payment in U.S. dollars for its oil, a major divergence from typical oil market practices. And really what they're doing here, the real reason may be just a sales pitch to China, India, and other large oil markets. So we already have the economic warfare, right? I mean, the signs are all there. And even our government officials are saying there's no option left. Send it over to the Pentagon. And Trump, I believe, is weighing military options right now.
Oh, absolutely. I think, he has to surround himself with, the military brass who's been there for years. I mean, these military men and women, they've been there for years studying North Korea. As far as the deep state and the military-industrial complex, I mean, they've been prepared for this. They've been doing war games off the coast of North Korea for years and for years. But they all know one thing that they don't report to us. You can only hear it right here on AMTV and alternative news, which is Russia and China, as they said, China has said directly, they will not allow a preemptive strike or a strike against North Korea to take out the regime. They're not going to allow it. And they're not going to allow the West to be right on their doorstep. And they're not going to allow the South China Sea to be taken away from them. Again, the reason why they're building up all those man-made military islands. And people have to understand that this is a game that America media is playing with us, acting like the threat is just the same old thing. It is not whatsoever. We are on the brink of World War III. As a matter of fact, it's happening now. It's just the beginning of it.
Yeah, for example, the American media didn't acknowledge the Vietnam War for 10 years.
For 10 years.
I mean, come on. We are already at war now. And
absolutely.
The biggest lie sold, I believe, and this has even been sold by Donald Trump, is that somehow China, America's enemy, China, right, is going to de-escalate tensions in the Korean Peninsula. No, they're not. You know what China told Trump the other day? They said, back off, North Korea. I mean, that's what they told him, right? Yep. I mean, who's in the position of power here? It doesn't look like the U.S. Honestly, this is what Trump spoke to through his entire campaign, that American policy is weak. Believe me, we'll be strong, right? Well, we look weak now. We have done nothing. I am reporting and getting very frustrated having to report on all these missiles firing every other day. And, just look at the terrorist activity, too. I didn't even report on the story because this happens so frequently. The terror attack in London just a couple of days ago. I mean, we're vulnerable. The U.S. is vulnerable. Europe is vulnerable. I mentioned, Chad, and I don't know if you had caught this report, this was the news article from HuffPost, a liberal newswire, but they basically said that the U.S. won't defend Canada from missile attack under current policies. Just wanted to read some really quick here. It said, current U.S. policy directs the American military not to defend Canada if it is targeted in a ballistic missile attack, says the top Canadian officer at NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command. We're being told in Colorado Springs, where you're at, that the extant U.S. policy is not to defend Canada, said Lieutenant General Pierre Amond, Deputy Commander of Colorado-based NORAD. Now, I'm not sure what that means. It's just interesting that that's been the most recent story printed, that we're, not going to defend our ally? That sounds really nice.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously this treaty between us and Canada, again, has been going on since the Soviet Union. I mean, and Russia, they're making their plays. I mean, Putin, he's doing his war games. He's prepared. In Syria, I feel Russia absolutely gained the upper hand and kind of pushed America out to an extent. Now, they said that Donald Trump stopped funding these rebels in Syria, but we're still seeing, U.S.-backed rebels, or whatever, people want to call them.
Yeah.
still fighting the same fight, and we all know who they are. They're radical Islamic extremists, just like we funded Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan during the 80s. And now Putin, absolutely, he knows what's going on, the war games. They've taken control over the areas there, much more than America has, kind of pushed them off to the side. Putin is making movements into the Arctic a lot more. I'm sure they're probably going to put missile defense systems or missile launchers there as well. They're keeping their eye on Alaska. As we all know, Alaska used to be a part of Russia. And they're all keeping an eye on that. And Alaska, Canada is a huge threat for missiles coming through Russia. So there's a huge chess game being played. NORAD is right in the middle of it to protect us from any air defense missile attacks that we have, either from the air or from space. And we know weapons are advancing at an extent that is unbelievable. And yet again, we're waiting and we're waiting. And my deepest fear about the fact that we're waiting is because we're waiting for Americans to die in huge numbers, just like in Pearl Harbor and just like in 9/11.
Yeah, that's my greatest fear as well, the Pearl Harbor moment that Trump needs, just like FDR needed it, to sell a very unpopular war. Otherwise, America never would have gone involved. But when Pearl Harbor hit, everybody was on board, right? We saw the same thing with September 11, 2001. Nobody even cared if the U.S. and George W. Bush was invading countries that had nothing to do with it. No one cared. They just put up the American flag and, hey, whatever we need to do. And so, again, that's probably the greatest threat. And I also think very overlooked right now is that I believe what's happening in the Korean Peninsula today, as we broadcast this video, is retaliation for Trump's airstrike in Syria. People think that didn't have any consequences. Well, China thinks it has consequences. Russia thinks it has consequences. Iran thinks it has consequences. So, people need to wake up and understand it's not about North Korea. It's about the BRICS nations and a larger global conflict. I mean, we see some of the war games going on right now, too. In the Baltic states, China is withdrawing from the border. They've got troops there. They've amassed tens of thousands of troops at the border of Korea, but they've also been very concerned. I don't know if you caught this, but one of the volcanoes there erupting because of, and all this seismic activity because of all these bombs, the hydrogen bomb that they just tested a week or so ago, and everything that's going on there. I mean, they don't know if there's going to be nuclear fallout, radiation just from these tests, yet alone an actual strike.
Oh no, absolutely, and that's the thing. I mean, look at the war games and the extent that they're at now, and the preparations. Even Russia withdrawing hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers from certain borders, given the threat with North Korea. They know it's coming, but the alliance between, like you said, the BRICS, the alliance between Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea, no matter what happens, no matter any diplomatic policies pushed forward by the United States, that alliance will never break, because their main goal is to end the American empire 100%. Now, Russia isn't at the point where they just want to be like, okay, in the same situation and they just want to be isolated. No, Putin wants to expand the Russian Federation. They want to expand it. He's not going to leave Ukraine whatsoever, no matter what diplomatic row happens. And he needs his allies, China, North Korea, and Iran. So no matter what happens as far as the nuclear deal between America and Iran, I don't think Donald Trump is honestly going to do anything with that nuclear deal. I think Russia is really pressuring America on that, especially given the fact with the threat with North Korea. I don't think we're in a good position. I don't think we're in a good position with any diplomacy whatsoever. And I think that's why, again, you see the war games advancing to an extent that they are. And I just think they're waiting for that moment, Chris. They're waiting for that justification to send our sons and daughters to fight in this war.
Yeah, I tweeted something along the lines that remember, the same people that will enlist the new draft are the ones that won't fight it. You know, and that's always how it tends to work out. Well, please keep us updated on the ground. You mentioned maybe being able to get a little closer to NORAD, but again, it's tough to get close to. Don't get too close. That was the advice I got from the individual that I know who said that he actually spent a few days in that facility.
Right.
And go ahead.
No, and just to give you a little geographical information here, this is Cheyenne Mountain, basically, and the military bunker is built into it. I've talked to a military man has a buddy who goes to NORAD, and basically it's built like a ship inside of this mountain. Built like a ship inside of the mountain. Almost every president since the Soviet Union, since the rift between the Soviet Union and us, has visited this area. It is the safety area for presidents to go in times of distress. I wouldn't be surprised if Donald Trump arrives in this military bunker if we were to have war with North Korea. I just want to give you guys just that, that viewpoint. I mean, it's right here. It's right here. I've been trying to get a little bit closer. Obviously, it's hard to access. I'm going to keep doing everything I can to give you guys a better image of it. I've seen signs and things to not cross in certain areas. So I've been trying my best to get there without getting locked up, so I can keep reporting for you guys.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Chad. Be careful out there, as always. And again, I think this kind of goes without saying, but the president and the deep state have bunkers, right? They've got
Absolutely.
Their nuclear fallout shelters. They've got their food prep and their rations and their self-defense and all these kinds of things. It's the common man that doesn't. Again, they're going to send your sons and daughters to fight this new war, but they won't fight it themselves, right? I mean, it's just like, you send your kids to the front lines, Donald Trump. You send your kids, George W. Bush, to the front lines. But of course, actions speak louder than words, and they'll glorify the American people going out to fight these wars on false pretenses.
Absolutely, Chris. And I want to say one thing to your audience, just from my experience, just with something that was minimal. I mean, it wasn't minimal. A lot of people were out of power. There was a lot of damage. But just alone with Hurricane Irma, there was no supplies. There were no supplies. There was no water. There was no gas. You need to be prepared right now. You need to be prepared. You can't wait, because when you do, you're not going to have anything. And the panic just off that hurricane, people went crazy. Imagine. Once we're in the brink of World War III, and we have missiles not flying over Japan, but flying over America, and how everything is going to get shut down. The government isn't going to tell you about it. They don't want you to panic. They don't want you to panic because they don't care. They don't care. They need to ensure that their policy is put in place. Okay, so you need to be prepared and not expect CNN or Fox or MSNBC to give you the information that you need in case of a severe emergency. So people get prepared. Get prepared.
Yeah, and it's I hate to be facetious with such a serious conversation. But I mean, I joked again over the weekend on Twitter, you'll get an emergency text alert after the blast hits. Okay, I mean, they're not going to tell you in advance. Okay, you're not going to get a memo like, hey, by the way, guys, we're about to be hit. Okay, according to the official narrative, September 11th, they didn't even know that was coming. So it could just be malfeasance. They're just bad at what they do. The government can't protect you, but they're not going to give you a heads up. And I did want to ask you, what did you think the hardest part was outside? I know you had food and water ration out in Florida, but what do you think that was the most difficult? Was it the air conditioning, just not being without that? That's a common luxury we all have nowadays, but it's really hot in Florida.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was like 120 degrees without power in Florida. It was the fact that you couldn't get ice. It was the fact that you couldn't get water. It was the fact that when you go to these stores, most of them aren't open. They're running on a backup generator. They're throwing out all their produce, throwing out all of the food. You might have a couple cans of tuna. You're not going to be able to ration up. You're not going to be able to supply yourself. That is the main issue with an emergency. And a lot of people think, because America is, you go to these stores on a normal day. Oh, it's so stocked and so supplied, and it's just
the supply chain is 2 to 3 days. Everything's gone. And the way they're pushing us, I was talking about this in studio behind closed doors with, for example, Amazon, just a total monopoly buying Whole Foods and then putting out all the other competitors out of business because they don't even need to turn a profit. That's not even their goal. It's just to extinguish and exterminate all competition. So every grocery store, Vons, Ralph's, Albertsons, whatever you've got, Safeway, could potentially all go out of business. And we're just relying on one company, Jeff Bezos, to supply you with food via drone. Right? I mean, they're basically... It's the infrastructure itself that is becoming even more vulnerable by the day. And we just look at how vulnerable we are with the internet. And if, God forbid, the grid goes down, you won't be able to buy or sell. You won't be able to get gas. You won't be able to do anything. So, self-sufficiency is important. Is why we stress prepping. Get your bug-out bags. Chad has one, right? So you need to prep today. And by the way, it does support our cause, our mission, what we do here. It supports Chad Booksam, on the ground AMTV reporter. We've got a 10% off bug out bag special, limited time on every single emergency kit that we offer. We even got a dog kit, which I've sold quite a few over the weekend because a lot of us, like myself, have pets. Be prepared. Just don't wait. And if you don't buy it from us, buy it somewhere else because you're going to need it.
Absolutely. And not even just that, because the bug out bag lasts. You can buy your bug out bag now. You can put it in place, and once something happens, you can grab it and you can go. Yeah. Because you don't want to go to these markets. First of all, the line. I'm sure I showed you guys some previous videos. The lines are hectic. Everything is gone. And look, this is not a sales pitch. This is just firsthand experience from what I saw just off of a hurricane hitting one state, just off of a hurricane.
With a warning, with a heads up that it was coming. Again, we're not going to get a warning potentially with the next crisis. And I know just for me, honestly, this is just me personally, it's just peace of mind. Knowing that in a panic type scenario, I won't be panicking. I don't have to rush out to the store. I've, done what I need to do to protect myself and my family. Well, Chad, keep us posted, man. I really appreciate what you're doing. Some incredible reporting. I think your reporting on the ground with Irma was the best anyone had covered that event. So I really appreciate you're really hitting it hard on the ground for us. And let us know if you can get a little closer to NORAD or if there's anything else interesting you can find there. Hopefully you don't see any limos pulling up or the president's helicopter dropping them off, right?
If I do, I'll shoot you a text. Right. I couldn't be more proud reporting here for AMTV.
Thank you, Chad. We'll talk real soon.
Absolutely.